What would it take for a father to deny his own daughter-in-law a place at his funeral? In the world of ordinary families, such a question might seem cruel, even inconceivable. But inside the stone walls of Buckingham Palace, beneath the weight of crowns and centuries of tradition, emotions are never just personal. They are political, symbolic, and tightly wound with legacy. And in a world ruled by legacy, every word spoken, every presence at an event, and every absence, especially a deliberate one, can echo through history. It began not with a loud proclamation or a dramatic press release, but with a document. A royal funeral plan, updated discreetly, circulated quietly among key officials and family members. In it, a simple but devastating sentence stood out like a red slash across white parchment. Meghan Markle, Duchess of Sussex, is not to be invited to King Charles III's funeral. The order was clear. Her name had been deliberately omitted from the list of those to stand in silent reverence as the monarch's body is laid to rest. Her husband, Prince Harry, would be permitted to attend. Their children, Archie and Lilibet, too, were welcome. But Meghan was not. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. It wasn't a clerical error. It wasn't an oversight. It was a decision, calculated, deliberate, and above all, personal. To the outside world, such an exclusion would seem vindictive. After all, this was the woman Charles once welcomed into the royal fold, the American actress who was supposed to modernize the monarchy's image, bring fresh perspective, and stand beside Harry as symbols of a new generation. But as those who've watched the slow unraveling of the House of Windsor in recent years know, this decision wasn't born in haste. It was the product of years of tension, wounds that never healed, and a lingering bitterness that not even time could wash away. For some, it felt inevitable. Ever since Harry and Meghan stepped back from royal duties in 2020, choosing freedom over formality and Hollywood over heritage, the divide has been widening. With every interview Meghan gave, with every documentary aired, every memoir page turned, the royal family was left gasping for breath, reeling from the blows. And at the center of the storm stood King Charles, first as a prince and then as monarch, watching as the institution he'd spent his life preparing to inherit was dragged into public controversy. But even those close to Charles, even seasoned courtiers and family members, were stunned by this final act of exclusion. To bar Meghan Markle from his funeral? That was not just a family decision. That was a royal decree, one with global implications, one that would shape the narrative of Charles's final days and cast a long shadow over his legacy. So what drove him to it? Why take such a definitive, controversial step, knowing the world would watch, speculate, and divide over its meaning? To understand that, we must go back to the earliest days of this royal conflict, to the quiet smiles that masked growing tension, to the promises made and broken. We must retrace the path from welcome to exile, from embrace to rejection. We must delve into the inner workings of a family bound not only by blood but by duty, decorum, and history. And we must reckon with the one truth that makes this story both deeply personal and profoundly tragic, that in the House of Windsor, even love has its limits. The very idea of a monarch excluding someone from their own funeral feels like something out of Shakespearean tragedy. And yet, this is no fiction. The details, while cloaked in official discretion, have been whispered by palace insiders and echoed in the halls of royal correspondence. The instruction was tucked within what's known in royal circles as Operation Menai Bridge, the code name for King Charles III's funeral protocol, akin to his mother's Operation London Bridge. While the public will only ever see the ceremonial grandeur, the black-plumed guards, the glistening carriages, the solemn hymns, what lies behind the curtain is a masterfully choreographed script detailing every moment, every movement, every name. And in that master plan, Meghan's name is missing. But what makes this revelation even more jarring is that Prince Harry, according to those closest to him, has known for months. He saw the document. He read the line. He knew. And he said nothing, not publicly, not to Meghan, not to the media. Instead, he kept the knowledge to himself, stewing in silence, caught between two worlds, the woman he loves and the family that shaped him. Imagine, for a moment, what that burden must feel like. Knowing your father, a king, has made a final decision that not only separates your wife from his memory, but does so in a way that cannot be undone. Funerals, after all, are not just about death. They are about closure, respect, and public recognition. To be excluded from such a moment is to be denied your place in the story. It is, in many ways, a form of erasure. Yet, perhaps that was precisely the point. Sources close to Buckingham Palace claim Charles's motive was clear. He didn't want his funeral to become a media circus. He feared that Meghan's presence, with all the baggage of her past statements, her press coverage, and her contentious image within the UK, would overshadow what was meant to be a moment of solemn remembrance. This wasn't about revenge, they insist. It was about legacy, his legacy. He wanted his final send-off to focus on the monarchy, on the institution he fought so hard to uphold and modernize. On his children, yes, but only those he believed were still upholding the dignity of their roles. On his grandchildren, whose futures are still unwritten. And on his wife, Camilla, whose controversial place in history had finally found a quiet acceptance, something Charles knew could easily be upended by a single misstep or a single presence. Meghan, in his eyes, was that presence. But here's where the story deepens. Because for all the finger-pointing and scandal-chasing that has followed Meghan Markle, her exclusion raises uncomfortable questions, not just about her, but about the monarchy itself. Was this an act of principled protection, or a petty final jab? Did Charles truly believe his legacy was at risk, or was he still nursing old wounds from interviews, accusations, and the emotional betrayal of a son-turned-critic? And what of Harry? What does it say about their bond that Charles would allow his son to mourn, yet deny him the comfort of having his wife by his side? What does it reveal about the emotional calculus of a royal family that has always chosen duty over intimacy? These are the questions we'll explore in this story. This is not just about a funeral or a document. It's about the unraveling of a family, the fragile thread between love and loyalty, and the high cost of royal legacy. It's about what happens when silence is louder than words, and when absence speaks volumes more than presence ever could. Because whether you admire or resent Meghan Markle, whether you see Harry as a victim or a traitor, one thing is undeniable. Something in this family broke a long time ago. And now, in the shadow of a monarch's final days, that fracture is more visible than ever. And yet, buried beneath all the protocol and politics lies a very human ache. The kind that exists when a father and son look at each other and no longer recognize what they see. When love is conditional. When forgiveness comes too late. As we peel back the layers of this royal rift, you'll hear from insiders, historians, and those who've stood close enough to feel the chill of royal frost firsthand. You'll see the cracks behind the polished smiles, the truth behind the palace gates. And you'll be asked to decide, was King Charles III protecting the crown or punishing the woman his son chose to love? This is the story behind the silence. The decision that shocked a kingdom. The funeral that became a battleground for legacy, loyalty, and loss. And so we return to the question that set this entire narrative in motion. What kind of decision causes a global stir before it's even enacted? The answer lies not in the pomp of a royal funeral, nor in the quiet drafting of a document, but in the deep, aching emotional history behind it. A history that has been simmering behind palace walls for years, now boiling over into public spectacle. Because this decision, this exclusion of Meghan Markle from King Charles III's funeral, isn't just a logistical move. It's a message, a final punctuation mark at the end of a fraught relationship that began in hope and ended in scandal. This story has always been a delicate balance between public image and private turmoil. For the British monarchy, perception is everything. And for King Charles, this final act was about more than just setting the tone for his departure. It was about protecting the very thing he believed he was born to uphold, the monarchy's reputation. It's a concept steeped in centuries of duty, sacrifice, and the belief that the crown must endure at any cost. And in Charles's mind, Meghan Markle, whether rightly or wrongly, had become a threat to that endurance. From the moment she entered the royal spotlight, Meghan was unlike anyone the firm had ever encountered. American, biracial, self-assured, and already famous in her own right, she didn't fit the mold. She wasn't shaped by the British press, nor was she beholden to royal customs or the shadowy courtiers who so often shaped the narrative. That made her a wild card. That made her dangerous. At first, there was hope. Charles had reportedly admired Meghan's intelligence and charm. He even walked her partway down the aisle during her wedding to Harry, a gesture seen as deeply symbolic. But as tensions began to surface between Meghan and the press, between the couple and the palace, and between Harry and his brother William, Charles found himself cornered. Every step Meghan took away from the royal fold seemed to ripple outward, causing deeper rifts and exposing fault lines within the family. Her allegations of racism, her claims of neglect, and her decision to take the story public rather than resolving it in private struck at the heart of everything the royals valued: discretion, unity, and image. Charles, a man who had waited his entire life to become king, was suddenly reigning in an era of instability and cultural reckoning. He wasn't just managing a kingdom. He was managing a family war that played out under relentless scrutiny. And as he saw it, every time Meghan Markle appeared, every time she spoke, the media storm followed. Her presence became synonymous with controversy. And that, more than anything else, was what Charles hoped to avoid when envisioning his final day. A royal funeral isn't merely a family event. It's a national ceremony, a global broadcast, and a symbol of transition. Queen Elizabeth II's funeral drew over 4 billion viewers worldwide. Charles knew his own would carry similar weight. And he wanted that moment to be about continuity, not conflict. About mourning a monarch, not debating a scandal. It's in that context that the funeral exclusion begins to make sense, at least from his perspective. By removing Meghan from the event, Charles believed he was stripping away the circus and reclaiming the solemnity. But at what cost? There is a deeper layer here, one that speaks to personal pain and generational trauma. Charles himself was no stranger to public vilification. The memory of Princess Diana still casts a long shadow over his reign. For decades, he was portrayed as the cold husband, the unfeeling father, the man who broke the fairy tale. Even his marriage to Camilla, once labeled the most hated woman in Britain, was a slow burn of public redemption. Perhaps that's why Charles was so unforgiving when it came to Meghan. He saw in her the potential to reopen wounds that had just begun to heal. The monarchy, after all, is not designed for redemption arcs. It is built on protocol, on stoicism, on the quiet dignity of knowing one's place. And Meghan, for all her charisma and philanthropic goals, had challenged that structure from day one. She asked questions. She pushed boundaries. She exposed cracks. And perhaps worst of all, in Charles's eyes, she convinced his son to walk away. For Harry, the heartbreak was multi-layered. To learn that your wife is unwelcome at your father's funeral is a blow few could comprehend, especially after enduring the pain of losing his mother at such a young age. Harry has long sought to protect the people he loves from the institution he believes failed him. Meghan, to him, isn't just a partner, she's a lifeline. The idea that she could be blamed, targeted, and excluded, even in death, is a pain that doesn't fade easily. Insiders say Harry was told in advance, not in some cold, official email, but in a private conversation, one where Charles explained his reasoning, his fears, and his final wishes. The conversation, by all accounts, was tearful and strained. Harry didn't shout. He didn't argue. He simply listened. And when the call ended, he sat in silence, as if absorbing the weight of what had just been said. He reportedly hasn't told Meghan. Not directly. There are hints that she suspects, whispers from friends, strange silences in their home. But if Harry has confirmed it to her, he's done so only with the gentlest of words, if at all. He knows the damage it would cause. He knows how deeply it would cut. And yet, the decision stands. To the public, this story is only beginning to unravel. As news spreads of the leaked funeral plan, the headlines will grow sharper, the debates more heated. Was Charles justified? Is Meghan the victim or the provocateur? Should Harry protest or protect his father's legacy? These are the questions that will dominate the discourse. But beneath the noise lies a quieter truth, one not about royal politics, but about human relationships. Because funerals, at their core, are about closure, about saying goodbye with grace and acknowledging the life that was. To deny someone that moment, to keep them out of the room where history is being written, is to deny them a part of that history. And for Meghan Markle, No matter how far she may stand from the crown, her place in that family is real. This video will explore the full scope of that reality. We will look at the events that led up to this decision, the wounds left by interviews and memoirs, and the conversations behind palace walls that led to one of the most controversial royal exclusions in modern history. You will hear the voices of those who were there, who saw the tension rise and watched as hope turned to heartbreak. We will walk through the days of Megxit, the fallout from Oprah, the Netflix revelations, and the brutal honesty of Harry's memoir. We will dive into the tension between duty and love, between legacy and truth. And we will confront the emotional weight that hangs over a family too proud to reconcile and too broken to let go. Because this isn't just the story of a king and a duchess. It's the story of a family torn apart by the world watching. And perhaps, in that story, we find a mirror to our own. This is where the journey begins. It was a quiet Tuesday when the leak happened. The world was going about its business, unaware that deep within the sealed corridors of royal protocol, a storm was brewing that would soon command headlines across the globe. A document, meant only for the eyes of a few select palace officials and senior royals, had been quietly updated. The update wasn't explosive on the surface. It didn't carry bold fonts or dramatic headlines. But to those who understood the language of the monarchy, the delicate phrasing, the coded silences, it was seismic. The funeral protocol for King Charles III, known internally as Operation Menai Bridge, had been revised. For months, this elaborate plan had been in development, crafted by top royal aides, military officials, and constitutional advisors. Every detail was outlined with obsessive precision, from the ceremonial route of the cortege to the order of family appearances to the sequence of hymns and prayers. But tucked within the section labeled Attendees, Immediate Family and Dignitaries, a glaring omission made itself known. The name Meghan, Duchess of Sussex, was absent. No footnote, no explanation, just silence. In its place, a simple directive clarified that immediate family would include the king's sons, daughters-in-law, except the Duchess of Sussex, grandchildren, and siblings. The exclusion was deliberate. It was not the result of miscommunication or logistical oversight. This was not a clerical error from a distracted secretary. It was a top-down decision, reportedly signed off by the king himself and reviewed by his most senior advisors. And somehow, that detail slipped through the iron gates of Buckingham Palace and into the hands of someone willing to speak. The story broke not through the tabloids, but through a mid-level journalist working for a reputable international news outlet, someone known more for deep dives into foreign policy than royal scandal. But the leak was undeniable. An internal source provided redacted screenshots and confirmed that the document had been circulated within the palace only days prior. Within hours, social media was ablaze. Meghan Markle was officially barred from attending her father-in-law's funeral. The reaction was immediate. Some users expressed outrage. How could a man who once walked Meghan down the aisle now deny her the right to say goodbye? Others celebrated the move, seeing it as Charles finally asserting control over what they viewed as a chaotic, damaging relationship between the royal family and the Sussexes. But one thing everyone agreed upon. This wasn't a trivial footnote in royal planning. This was a declaration. For royal watchers and insiders, the language used in the document was telling. The British monarchy rarely communicates directly in emotional terms. Their language is designed to be antiseptic, procedural, even cold. But that coldness masks intent. The lack of inclusion, without explanation, sends a stronger message than any public statement ever could. It allows the firm to remain above the fray while delivering a blow that is impossible to ignore. What makes this revelation even more potent is how it contrasts with past royal funerals. Even the late Princess Diana, whose divorce from Prince Charles and subsequent estrangement from the royal family caused deep institutional discomfort, was mourned with a sense of public obligation and ceremonial dignity. The royal family understood then, as they do now, that funerals are symbolic events. They represent not just closure, but also recognition of role, of presence, of belonging. And Meghan, despite the controversies, had been a royal duchess, a wife to a prince, a mother to royal children. She was, by all definitions, part of the family. So why now? Why this Palace insiders claimed the decision was the culmination of years of behind-the-scenes frustration. Since Meghan and Harry's explosive interview with Oprah Winfrey in 2021, Buckingham Palace had been scrambling to maintain its grip on public image. Allegations of racism, neglect, and institutional cruelty had scarred the family's reputation. Meghan's narrative, which portrayed the palace as an outdated, emotionally bankrupt institution, was both powerful and resonant. And the monarchy, bound by its refusal to comment on personal matters, struggled to defend itself. Then came the Netflix docuseries, which further detailed the Sussexes' version of events. Behind the scenes, there were meetings, tense, private gatherings where Charles, William, and key advisors debated their next move. The palace had remained publicly silent, but privately, there was anger. Charles, now king, was said to be especially disturbed by how the institution was portrayed. Cold, calculated, indifferent to the well-being of family. The final straw, many believe, came with the release of Prince Harry's memoir, Spare. In it, Harry delved into deeply personal experiences, his grief over Diana, his trauma within the institution, and most notably, his strained relationship with his father. Charles, long misunderstood by the public, now found himself painted in a new, unflattering light. As a distant father, more interested in public image than private affection. One passage in particular reportedly stung, when Harry described his father's apparent inability to embrace him, even in his darkest moments. The memoir hit Charles hard. Sources say he spent days in isolation after reading early summaries. It wasn't just the content, it was the sense of betrayal, that his own son, whom he had tried to protect in his own rigid way, had gone so far to expose family wounds to the world. And in those weeks, as preparations for his own funeral began, standard procedure for monarchs even when in good health, Charles made a decision. He didn't want Meghan there. Not because he hated her, those close to him say, but because her presence, in his mind, would overshadow the meaning of the day. He envisioned a media frenzy. Journalists dissecting every glance, every movement. Paparazzi chasing photos of her grieving face. Tabloids printing speculative headlines about drama inside the church. For Charles, the funeral needed to be about the crown, about the monarchy's endurance, not the drama that had plagued it in recent years. And Meghan, whether fairly or not, had become the face of that drama. To make the exclusion official, Charles turned to his advisors. The inclusion or exclusion of royal family members in ceremonial events is always a legal and constitutional matter, carefully documented and approved. The updated plan was submitted, reviewed, and signed. And just like that, Meghan's name disappeared. The most striking part? Prince Harry was informed. He received the revised protocol weeks before the leak. Insiders say the conversation was brief but emotional. Charles didn't ask for Harry's approval. He simply informed him. It was not a negotiation. It was a royal order. And Harry, for all his rebellion and pain, said very little in return. According to one aide, he simply nodded, thanked his father for letting him know, and ended the call. No shouting, no tears, just silence. But silence, in this case, spoke volumes. Since the leak, the Sussexes have made no official comment. Meghan has continued her public engagements, smiling for the cameras, showing no outward signs of reaction. Harry, however, has been notably more withdrawn. His public appearances have grown fewer. And when he does appear, his face carries a heaviness that even the most polished public demeanor can't conceal. The world may only now be discovering the exclusion, but for Harry, this wound has already begun to scar. The document itself remains classified. Only a handful of reporters have seen the redacted version. But the implications are clear. And for those who study the monarchy, not just its history but its psychological patterns, this decision marks a shift. A king who once tried to blend tradition with compassion has drawn a line in the sand. He is not just defending his crown. He is drawing the battle lines for how he wants to be remembered. And Meghan Markle, by royal decree, is no longer part of that memory. When Meghan Markle first stepped into the royal arena, there was a collective breath of anticipation, curiosity, and optimism. The British monarchy, often accused of being rigid and outdated, seemed poised for a rebirth. Meghan, a biracial American actress with a global following, charitable ambitions, and media savvy, was the very image of modern royalty. The public wanted to believe that her arrival marked the beginning of a new chapter, one where inclusion, diversity, and global resonance could finally be embraced within the age-old halls of Buckingham Palace. And for a fleeting moment, it worked. Her engagement to Prince Harry was met with euphoria. Media outlets splashed headlines praising her grace and beauty. Crowds gathered with handmade signs. Children waved Union Jacks and posters of the smiling couple. The idea of Meghan Markle becoming a duchess, the first woman of color to marry into the core of the British royal family, held symbolic weight. She was a success story, a self-made woman, admired for her philanthropic efforts and feminist voice. Her image as an outsider only strengthened her appeal. She was fresh, she was confident, and she wasn't afraid of the camera. But behind palace gates, the reception was far more complicated. According to multiple former aides and royal historians, the early days of Meghan's entry into the royal fold were marked by uncertainty. Not about her personally, but about what her presence represented. Unlike royal brides before her, Meghan came fully formed. She had already lived a public life, spoken out on political issues, and championed causes such as gender equality and mental health awareness. She wasn't looking for a role. She brought her own. This autonomy, admirable to the outside world, rattled the traditions of the firm. The monarchy, by its very nature, is an institution built on hierarchy, not individualism. It demands deference, not disruption. And here was a woman who spoke with candor, didn't wait for permission, and asked questions that some considered impolite, especially when directed at ancient customs. One former palace staff member recounted an early moment during Meghan's introduction to royal life. During a briefing on protocol, she reportedly asked, "Why do we do it this way?" The question wasn't meant as a challenge, but it was perceived as one. In a world where tradition often goes unquestioned, even mild curiosity can be seen as rebellion. Still, the palace pushed forward. The wedding was arranged with grandeur. Prince Charles personally walked Meghan partway down the aisle, a symbolic gesture that stunned many and warmed hearts. For one glorious day in May 2018, Windsor Castle became the epicenter of global joy. The gospel choir, the bishop's sermon, the fashion, and the interracial symbolism all coalesced into what many called a moment of hope. But weddings are ceremonies. Real life is something else entirely. Almost immediately after the nuptials, cracks began to show. British tabloids, once fawning, began a slow, corrosive campaign of criticism. Stories emerged about Meghan allegedly making Kate Middleton cry over flower girl dresses. Tales of diva behavior from Kensington Palace staff made the rounds. Anonymous sources painted her as demanding, cold, and dismissive of tradition. Even the language used to describe her shifted. Where Kate was described as graceful and elegant, Meghan was labeled ambitious and opinionated. The media's double standard was blatant to some and invisible to others. But for Meghan, the message was clear. She was not going to be treated like other royals. Her American directness, which had been celebrated prior to the wedding, was now being weaponized. Her every action was scrutinized, her motives questioned, her past dug up. And while public attention fixated on Meghan's wardrobe or alleged feuds, deeper tensions were unfolding within the family. Harry, long known for his sensitivity to media intrusion due to the loss of his mother, became increasingly protective. He watched as Meghan was vilified by the same press that had hounded Princess Diana. The sense of déjà vu was overwhelming. Friends close to Harry later said that he was haunted by the idea of history repeating itself. The palace's tepid response to the media attacks did little to reassure him. It wasn't just the press that troubled Meghan. Palace insiders suggest she also faced resistance from within. Staff who were used to working in a certain way reportedly found her approach difficult. She wanted to innovate, to streamline, to push forward causes like mental health and racial equity. But she encountered what some described as the invisible wall of palace culture. Meetings were formal, decisions were slow, and approval was often needed from multiple layers of hierarchy. There was also a noticeable lack of support. Meghan was expected to adjust, but few in the royal household were prepared to meet her halfway. Even as she tried to embrace the role of duchess, she was held to different standards. For example, when she wore dark nail polish, she was criticized for breaking protocol. despite no such criticism ever being leveled at royal family friends or foreign dignitaries who had done the same. But perhaps the most telling moments came behind closed doors. Meghan later described feeling isolated, even within the palace walls. The glamour of royal life, she said, masked a crushing loneliness. She was discouraged from going out, from speaking freely, from even seeing her friends. There were days, she said, when she wasn't allowed to leave the house because they were concerned about how it would look. Her passport, her keys, her driver's license, all were surrendered for security reasons, but the symbolism wasn't lost on her. She had lost her freedom. Harry, watching all of this unfold, became increasingly distressed. His once close relationship with Prince William grew strained. While William took the view that Meghan needed to adapt, Harry believed the institution needed to change. The two perspectives clashed. According to insiders, their conversations became tense. Once referred to as the Fab Four, Harry, Meghan, William, and Kate, the couples began to drift. Joint engagements became rare. Rumors of resentment, jealousy, and philosophical divides took root. What had started as a hopeful chapter was now devolving into a painful unraveling. And yet, through it all, Meghan continued to perform her royal duties. She accompanied Harry on tours, gave speeches, engaged in charity work, and even guest-edited an issue of British Vogue. But every step forward was met with another wave of criticism. Her voice, once praised for being articulate and empowering, was now labeled as controlling or Hollywood. Her confidence was rebranded as arrogance. Even her love for Harry, the center of their public persona, was mocked as manipulation by a cynical press. Then came the decision that would forever alter their trajectory, the choice to step back. In January 2020, Harry and Meghan announced via Instagram that they would be stepping down as senior members of the royal family. The palace was reportedly blindsided. Discussions were underway behind closed doors, but the couple had moved faster than expected. The shockwaves were immediate. Royal aides scrambled to respond. Headlines screamed of betrayal. The Queen called an emergency meeting at Sandringham. The rift was now undeniable. Some blamed Meghan for pulling Harry away from his heritage. Others saw Harry as the instigator, using Meghan as a scapegoat. But the truth, as always, was more complicated. Meghan, by all accounts, had tried to conform. But the institution wasn't built to absorb someone like her, not without changing in ways it was unwilling to change. From the moment she entered, the turbulence had begun. Not because she was unworthy, not because she lacked grace, but because she dared to bring her full self into a system that demanded quiet compliance. And now, years later, that turbulence has been codified in the most final way possible: exclusion from a royal funeral. A quiet but unmistakable sign that the monarchy never fully accepted her, even when the public tried to. Meghan Markle's royal entry wasn't just a chapter in modern monarchy. It was a collision course with history, and the tremors are still being felt. The world wasn't prepared for what was about to happen on that calm spring evening in March 2021. The setting was idyllic: a peaceful California garden, birds chirping in the distance, a light breeze rustling through the leaves. At the center of it all sat three people: Meghan Markle, Prince Harry, and Oprah Winfrey. It was poised to be a quiet conversation, a personal reflection on stepping back from royal duties. But within minutes, it became something else entirely. A bombshell that would ripple across nations, rattle the foundations of the British monarchy, and redefine public opinion of an institution cloaked in silence. From the very first question, it was clear this wasn't going to be a polite, surface-level interview. Oprah's tone was warm but direct. Meghan's expression was composed but heavy. When asked how she had been handling everything, Meghan took a breath, paused, and said something that would echo far beyond that California garden: "I just didn't want to be alive anymore." It was the first of many moments that would draw gasps across the globe. Meghan revealed that during her time as a working royal, she faced profound isolation, emotional abandonment, and, at one point, suicidal ideation. She said she reached out for help, not once, but repeatedly, and was turned away. According to her, royal aides told her seeking mental health assistance would reflect poorly on the monarchy. For millions of viewers, it was a staggering claim. The idea that someone inside the royal family could ask for help and be refused, not due to lack of resources, but because of image management, was more than a personal confession. It was an indictment of the system. It challenged the royal family's claims of compassion and modernity. It suggested that, beneath the polished facade, the institution was still governed by a code of silence and self-preservation. But the emotional weight didn't stop there. Meghan and Harry revealed that there had been conversations, behind closed doors, about the skin color of their unborn child. Without naming names, Meghan explained that a senior royal expressed concerns about how dark Archie's skin might be. The implication was chilling. Whether born out of ignorance or prejudice, the conversation sparked immediate backlash. Viewers, activists, and commentators around the world demanded answers. Who said it? What was the intention? And why had nothing been done? While Oprah later clarified that the Queen and Prince Philip were not involved in the conversation, the rest of the royal family remained silent. The palace issued a brief statement days later, reading, "Recollections may vary." It was a carefully worded response that did little to extinguish the flames. Harry, for his part, echoed Meghan's sentiments but spoke with more restraint. He said he felt trapped within the system and that he hadn't realized how confined his world was until he saw it through Meghan's eyes. He admitted to tensions with his father, King Charles, saying there was a period when Charles stopped taking his calls. He said he felt disappointed, not only as a son, but as a man trying to protect his own family. He described feeling unsupported, especially when the press turned on Meghan with what he saw as blatant racial undertones and misogynistic narratives. For viewers, especially in America, the interview became a rallying cry against outdated institutions. Celebrities, political figures, and mental health advocates weighed in. Social media exploded with hashtags like #IStandWithMeghan and #AbolishTheMonarchy. Late-night talk shows unpacked the claims. News outlets from Tokyo to Toronto aired round-the-clock coverage. Oprah, seasoned as she is, later described the experience as one of the most explosive interviews of her career. In Britain, the reaction was far more divided. While many were sympathetic to Meghan's mental health revelations, others viewed the interview as a betrayal. Critics argued that airing family grievances on international television, especially without concrete proof, was deeply inappropriate. They said it was calculated, damaging, and poorly timed, coming as Prince Philip's health was in decline. Piers Morgan, a longtime critic of Meghan, stormed off the set of Good Morning Britain after being challenged on his relentless attacks. The public debate grew louder and more polarized with each passing hour. Inside the palace, the mood was said to be grim. Courtiers were blindsided. Senior royals were furious. There was a sense of disbelief that Harry and Meghan had gone this far, revealing not only their personal pain, but the inner workings of a family that had always prized privacy above all else. Some insiders said the Queen was deeply saddened. Others said Charles was devastated. But the most telling reactions came not from official statements, but from what wasn't said. There were no public interviews from the royals in response, no press conferences, no emotional rebuttals. Instead, the monarchy did what it has always done in moments of crisis. It waited. Hoped the storm would pass. Let the silence speak for itself. Yet silence, in this case, was interpreted as complicity. The damage had already been done. The image of the royal family, once pristine and revered, now carried the weight of serious allegations. Not just about racism or neglect, but about emotional cruelty and systemic failure. The Crown, already grappling with questions about its relevance in the 21st century, was now under intense moral scrutiny. The rift between Harry and his family widened after that interview. Reports suggested that William was incandescent with rage. Charles, though quieter, allegedly felt humiliated. The idea that a king-in-waiting was painted as unresponsive to his son's suffering was a reputational disaster. It also deepened the emotional chasm between father and son, a rift that, as we now know, never truly healed. And Meghan? She became both a symbol and a scapegoat. To her supporters, she was a truth-teller, a woman who stood up to power and refused to be broken by it. To her critics, she was manipulative, theatrical, and insincere. But no matter where one stood, her impact was undeniable. She had forced a reckoning, not just within the royal family, but within British society itself. Conversations about race, mental health, and institutional accountability flooded media spaces. Younger generations questioned the value of monarchy altogether. Some even cow. Sources say Charles watched the interview more than once, not out of curiosity, but to absorb the full weight of what was said. To him, it wasn't just what they accused the family of, it was the fact that they aired it so publicly, without first attempting reconciliation in private. One aide described Charles as gutted, adding that the pain wasn't just political, it was paternal. He felt as if the bond he once had with Harry had been exploited for television ratings. In the weeks following the interview, the palace began to shift its tone. There was talk of slimming down the monarchy, focusing on core working royals, and distancing the firm from the Sussexes entirely. It was damage control, but also symbolic. If Harry and Meghan wanted out, then out they would be, entirely. Events they once would have attended were now closed to them. Their pictures quietly removed from palace walls. Their titles still intact, but their influence waning fast. And as funeral plans for Charles began in the background, a standard protocol for any reigning monarch, the Oprah interview became a point of reference. According to insiders, it was cited more than once during discussions of family protocol. The phrase used was minimize potential disruption. The unspoken translation, avoid turning the funeral into a media spectacle. And that's when the idea of excluding Meghan was first raised. The fallout from Oprah's interview didn't end when the cameras stopped rolling. It continued in the whispers of palace corridors, the glances during public engagements, the strained family conversations that either ended abruptly or never started at all. It created a scar that, for Charles, marked the boundary between forgiveness and finality. That interview wasn't just a moment. It was a line in the sand. And everything that followed, the growing distance, the private tension, and eventually, the decision to bar Meghan from Charles's funeral, can be traced back to that day, in that garden, when the truth, or at least one version of it, was finally spoken aloud. When Harry and Meghan announced their multi-million-dollar deal with Netflix in September 2020, it seemed, on the surface, like a logical next step for two people determined to forge a new life beyond the monarchy. The couple had recently settled in Montecito, California, stepping away from royal duties with the intention of becoming financially independent. They had spoken of their desire to tell meaningful stories, to give voices to the voiceless, and to build a platform for global compassion and education. But to those inside Buckingham Palace, the announcement landed like a thunderclap. It wasn't just the scale of the deal, reportedly worth around $100 million, that alarmed senior royals. It was what it symbolized. Harry and Meghan had transitioned from royal representatives to media producers, trading the quiet dignity expected of ex-royals for global entertainment clout. This wasn't simply about starting a charitable foundation or writing a memoir. This was partnering with the largest streaming platform in the world, a company known for provocative storytelling, unfiltered documentary work, and international reach. And suddenly, Harry and Meghan had the tools to tell their version of the royal story, without filters, without courtiers, and without the monarchy's consent. In palace corridors, the reaction was immediate and laced with dread. Senior aides convened within hours of the public announcement. They weren't just concerned about the Sussexes' newfound influence. They were terrified of what might be revealed. Harry was, after all, the son of the king. Meghan had lived behind palace walls, attended private family gatherings, and seen how the royal institution operated from the inside. They both had access, and now they had a platform. Reports from within Clarence House suggested that King Charles, then recently ascended to the throne, took the Netflix deal as a personal affront. While he understood their desire for independence, the idea that his son and daughter-in-law might publicly dissect or dramatize their experiences within the royal family, all while profiting from it, struck him as dangerous. It was one thing to leave the firm. It was another to document its secrets. There were whispers that Charles even tried to intervene. According to insiders, shortly after the deal became public, he attempted to set up a call with Harry, hoping to extract some form of assurance. He reportedly asked for guarantees that the family would be portrayed with respect, and that certain sensitive matters, especially involving Queen Elizabeth and Camilla, would remain untouched. Harry, according to the same sources, offered vague reassurances but made no binding promises. He and Meghan were determined to maintain full editorial control. For Charles, this was the tipping point. He had watched as his son distanced himself further with each decision. The Oprah interview had hurt deeply, but the Netflix deal posed a long-term threat. It wasn't just a one-off interview. It was a media empire in the making, complete with documentaries, scripted series, and the ability to shape narratives on a global scale. Behind closed doors, palace staff began drafting response protocols. They discussed scenarios. What if Harry released footage from private royal events? What if Meghan revealed conversations held in confidence with the Queen? What if the couple chose to fictionalize aspects of their royal life in a dramatized series? The possibilities were endless and terrifying. The firm, built on secrecy and symbolism, was now at risk of being turned into a storyline. Meanwhile, in the U.S., Harry and Meghan were moving full steam ahead. They founded Archwell Productions and quickly began developing projects focused on women's empowerment, mental health, and historical injustice. But it was clear to everyone watching, including the royals, that a tell-all documentary was inevitable. And sure enough, by late 2022, Netflix confirmed it. A docuseries titled simply Harry and Meghan was in production. The trailer alone was enough to trigger alarm bells. It featured black-and-white photos from their wedding, behind-the-scenes footage, and ominous voiceovers suggesting betrayal, sacrifice, and hidden pain. In one segment, Meghan said, "When the stakes are this high, doesn't it make more sense to hear our story from us?" That single line, calm, polished, and firm, was like a dagger to the royal institution. It told the world that what had been hidden would soon be revealed, and on their terms. Charles reportedly convened a private family meeting shortly after the trailer aired. Present were William, Camilla, and key legal advisors. The Queen, in her final months, was said to be shielded from the full details, though she was aware a documentary was coming. The question wasn't whether the series would do damage, it was how much and what kind. The royal response remained characteristically silent. Officially, the palace refused to comment on speculative media projects. But internally, a communication strategy was being drawn up. The family knew that any retaliation, any public statement, would only add fuel to the media fire. They chose instead to continue with public duties, presenting a united front and hoping the storm would pass. But behind the scenes, the tension was suffocating. When the documentary finally aired, it did not disappoint. Across 6 episodes, Harry and Meghan detailed everything. The media frenzy that surrounded their relationship, the racial undertones of British press coverage, the alleged coldness of palace staff, and their ultimate decision to walk away. They shared text messages, personal photographs, and deeply intimate reflections. Meghan revealed that palace officials had forbidden her from seeking outside help for her mental health. Harry admitted he was terrified of history repeating itself, referencing the fate of his mother. But perhaps the most painful moments, for Charles, came when Harry described their father-son relationship. He spoke of phone calls that stopped, of conversations that never went deep, of a man so preoccupied with image that he failed to protect his own child from media abuse. He didn't accuse Charles of malice, but painted him as distant, detached, and unwilling to confront the system that hurt his family. The series was a hit for Netflix. Millions tuned in around the world. And just like that, the royal family found themselves back under the microscope. What followed was a second wave of public division. Supporters hailed Harry and Meghan for their bravery and honesty. Critics saw them as calculating, using personal grievances to generate content. But for the monarchy, the damage was done. The House of Windsor, already struggling with modernization and public trust, now found itself battling a carefully crafted counter-narrative, one told from California, free from the constraints of palace protocol. For Charles, the fallout wasn't just external. It was emotional. His son had taken private pain and made it public. Worse still, he had done so without any communication with the family beforehand. Charles, according to those close to him, watched the series alone. He took notes. He replayed segments. He reportedly told one aide, "This isn't the boy I raised." And perhaps, in that moment, he made another decision. He would protect the monarchy, even if it meant making difficult choices. And so, in the months that followed, the royal household began adjusting its plans. Funeral arrangements, long discussed in general terms, began to take a sharper shape. Operation Menai Bridge was updated to reflect a changing reality, one in which Harry was still family, but Meghan was no longer welcome at the most sacred family moment of all. It was not revenge. It was a boundary. To Charles, this wasn't about punishing Meghan. It was about preserving his legacy. He had spent a lifetime waiting to wear the crown. He had endured scandal, ridicule, and the long shadow of Diana. Now, finally king, he would not allow his final farewell to be turned into a sideshow. Meghan, through Netflix, had chosen her platform. Charles, through protocol, chose his. The Netflix deal may have brought the Sussexes wealth, freedom, and global reach. But it also brought the final fracture in a royal relationship already hanging by a thread. And in the end, it became yet another reason, perhaps the most significant one, why Meghan Markle's name would not appear on the list of funeral attendees. It had been rumored for months, whispered in the dark corners of publishing houses and royal circles alike. But when the announcement came, it was still a shock to the system. Prince Harry was writing a memoir. Not just any memoir, but a raw and unflinching look at his life, in his own words. No palace oversight. No press intermediaries. No carefully vetted statement written by royal courtiers. Just Harry, unfiltered. The title alone sent ripples through the royal establishment. Spare. One word. Sharp. Loaded. Inescapably honest. From the moment it was revealed, the implication was undeniable. Harry wasn't just telling his story. He was framing himself through the lens of his lifelong position in the royal hierarchy. The spare to William's heir. The backup. The second choice. The shadow. For King Charles, who had spent decades trying to shake off the public's cold perception of him, this book was a gut punch before it was even published. It wasn't only about his reign, it was about his fatherhood. And this time, there would be no palace buffer. No aides to clean up the phrasing. Harry was going to tell the world what it was really like growing up under the weight of the crown. From the moment advance copies began circulating in media circles, it was clear that Spare was not going to hold back. The very first pages opened with a haunting memory of Diana's death, a scene described in such vivid, heartbreaking detail that even Harry's harshest critics were left silent. But it wasn't just an elegy for a lost mother. It was a reckoning with a father who, Harry alleged, often appeared more concerned with appearances than with the emotional needs of his sons. In one of the most painful segments, Harry described the moment Charles told him of Diana's death. According to Harry, his father sat on the edge of his bed, placed a hand on his knee, and delivered the news in a voice void of warmth or comfort. "They tried, darling boy. I'm afraid she didn't make it." Then he left the room. No hug, no tears, just a blunt declaration and a retreat. That anecdote, one of many, would become a defining passage in public conversations. It painted Charles as emotionally detached, a man molded by royal stoicism to such a degree that he couldn't comfort his own grieving child. The image, though subtle, was devastating. But Spare didn't stop there. Harry detailed fights with William that turned physical, arguments that escalated behind palace doors, and years of quiet resentment over how he was treated differently. He wrote of how the palace media machine played favorites, how stories were planted to protect William and Kate at the expense of him and Meghan. He described moments where Charles, faced with scandals or public pressure, seemed to withdraw rather than protect his youngest son. The portrait of the royal family wasn't one of cartoonish villains or monstrous cruelty. It was more painful than that. It was a story of emotional neglect, generational dysfunction, and a deeply broken system that prized duty above intimacy. What made Spare even more difficult for Charles to digest was that it didn't come from an outsider. These weren't accusations from a biographer, a journalist, or even Meghan. These were wounds laid bare by his own blood. A son, a prince, someone who had once called him Pa with affection. There was, of course, an immediate media frenzy. Newspapers ran with excerpts before the book's official release, dissecting every chapter, every phrase, every pointed memory. Television anchors debated Harry's motivations. Was this healing or revenge? Was it bravery or betrayal? Social media lit up with quotes and reactions. Some empathizing with Harry's pain, others accusing him of airing dirty laundry for profit. In the United Kingdom, the reactions were sharply divided along generational and ideological lines. Older royalists felt appalled. Many saw Harry's memoir as a deliberate attempt to destroy the monarchy's dignity. Young people, on the other hand, praised the transparency. They connected with Harry's discussion of mental health, trauma, and the loneliness of growing up in a fishbowl. Inside the palace, the reaction was more muted, but far more emotional. Charles, according to reports from those close to him, was shaken, not by the headlines. He had seen plenty of those in his lifetime, but by the clarity of the pain in Harry's words. He had always known his relationship with his youngest son was complicated, but seeing it spelled out in print, distributed globally, with such brutal precision, it broke something in him. Camilla, now queen consort, reportedly encouraged Charles to avoid responding publicly. Her logic was sound. Engaging with the book would only keep the scandal alive. But even she couldn't hide her unease when the chapters involving her surfaced. In one particularly sensitive section, Harry described her as dangerous, someone who had forged relationships with the press to rehabilitate her image at the cost of others. It was a raw admission. Harry even claimed that Camilla leaked private stories to elevate her own standing, suggesting that she had made him a casualty in her campaign to marry Charles and become queen. Though Harry didn't accuse her of malice, the insinuation was clear. Camilla had played the media game, and Harry had suffered the consequences. For Charles, the inclusion of Camilla in Spare was a red line. Whatever issues Harry had with him personally, Charles had hoped he would spare Camilla, who had spent years working to regain public favor. But Harry didn't hold back, and in doing so, he reopened old wounds, not just from the Diana years, but from the very foundation of Charles and Camilla's relationship. It's said that in the days following the book's release, Charles kept a copy of it on his desk, marked with tabs, dog-eared pages, and handwritten notes in the margins. It wasn't rage that overtook him. It was sadness. He reportedly told a close friend, he didn't write this alone. Someone encouraged him. Someone fed this. Whether he meant Meghan, a ghostwriter, or Harry's American circle, no one knows. But the message was clear. Charles no longer recognized the son he had raised. The release of Spare marked a new chapter in the royal family's rift. Any hope for quiet reconciliation had evaporated. The bridge between father and son had not only burned, it had been set ablaze in front of the entire world. And as Charles looked ahead to the unavoidable end of his reign, he began preparing for something he had once hoped would never happen: a funeral without his full family in unity. The plans for Operation Menai Bridge, already in place as part of standard royal protocol, were quietly updated. Where once there had been vague, inclusive language about the presence of all immediate family, a new phrasing emerged, one with an explicit caveat regarding the Duchess of Sussex. That detail, seemingly bureaucratic, carried enormous weight. To Charles, Harry's memoir was a line crossed. It wasn't the stories themselves, though they hurt deeply. It was the permanence of it. Words, once printed, cannot be taken back. They live on shelves, in libraries, in minds. Spare wasn't just a book. It was a final judgment, etched in ink. And so, when Charles made the decision to exclude Meghan Markle from his funeral, the reasoning wasn't only about headlines or crowd control. It was about trust, or the total absence of it. He feared that even in death, his legacy would be repackaged, dissected, and perhaps once again weaponized by those who had already made a career out of sharing royal secrets. He knew Meghan didn't write Spare, but he also knew the influence she held over Harry's worldview, and that, in his mind, made her complicit in the emotional blows that filled its pages. Whether this was fair or not, whether it was justifiable or cruel, is still up for debate. But from Charles's perspective, his funeral needed to be a place of peace, not politics. A sanctuary, not a stage. And Harry, torn between grief and loyalty, was left with a crushing burden. He had laid bare his truth. He had spoken for the first time in his life without permission. But in doing so, he had also closed a door, one he may never be able to reopen. There are moments in history where two forces collide not through a single catastrophic event, but through a gradual layering of friction, silence, resentment, and a mutual refusal to bend. The relationship between Meghan Markle and the British monarchy was one such collision, not loud at first, but steady, inevitable, and deeply transformative. From the moment Meghan stepped into royal life, a line began to draw itself between who she was and what the institution expected her to become. For a time, that line was subtle, blurred beneath smiles and formal engagements. But as the years wore on, it became more defined, sharper, and far more dangerous. At first, efforts were made to integrate her. Staff helped Meghan navigate the intricate maze of royal etiquette. She was given private lessons on curtsying, titles, and traditions. But behind those efforts was a palpable undercurrent, an unspoken expectation that she would adapt, blend in, and stay quiet when necessary. But Meghan didn't stay quiet. She asked questions about press policy, about gender roles, about staff hierarchy. She brought her own team with her, filled with professionals who had worked with her in the entertainment and humanitarian worlds. She wanted to modernize things, to bring a more personal approach to royal engagements. And she didn't wait for permission. Inside the firm, that approach was interpreted as disruptive. Staff, many of whom had served under multiple royal households for decades, viewed Meghan's suggestions as challenges to their authority. Stories began leaking to the press. Whispers of alleged bullying, of email barges at early morning hours, of staff in tears. These stories painted Meghan as difficult, demanding, and even abusive. She denied the claims. Her defenders said she was simply a high-functioning professional navigating an archaic system resistant to strong women. But the damage was done. The press, already skeptical of Meghan's Hollywood background, began to spin a narrative of division. The term Duchess Difficult made its way into headlines. Every public appearance was dissected, every expression analyzed for signs of superiority or contempt. When she cradled her baby bump, she was accused of seeking attention. When she spoke passionately about female empowerment, critics called her too political. In contrast, when Kate Middleton displayed similar behavior, the media response was celebratory, even reverent. The discrepancy wasn't lost on Meghan, nor was it lost on Harry. What they saw wasn't just press bias. It was institutional complicity. They believed that the palace press office, instead of defending them, was feeding the media cycle. They suspected internal briefings, calculated leaks, and a communication strategy that prioritized the reputation of the monarchy over the well-being of its own family members. That realization became the first real crack in their royal journey. The couple attempted to control the narrative by launching their own social media accounts and issuing personal statements. But these efforts clashed with the palace's centralized messaging structure. According to insiders, Meghan and Harry's growing independence infuriated senior aides, who viewed their actions as going rogue. The traditional order of things, where royal engagements were approved by committees and announcements were filtered through official channels, was being bypassed. Meghan and Harry wanted to be both royal and free. The monarchy, by its very nature, could not allow that. Tensions rose further when the couple decided to split their household from Kensington Palace and move to Frogmore Cottage. This physical separation mirrored the emotional distance growing between them and the rest of the royal family. The move was approved, but not without resistance. The press spun it as a rift between William and Harry, and for once, the press may not have been wrong. Behind closed doors, Meghan felt increasingly unwelcome. During the Queen's annual gatherings, insiders reported that Meghan often stayed quiet, watching carefully, choosing her words with care. She was aware that any misstep would become fodder for criticism. Yet even silence brought its own scrutiny. When she and Harry took a short break from royal duties after Archie's birth, newspapers accused her of laziness. When she returned to work, she was accused of being too eager to reclaim the spotlight. The impossible standards weighed on her. Her identity. As a mother, a woman of color, a wife, and a public figure, was being deconstructed in real time. And the institution did little to stop it. For Meghan, the moment that changed everything wasn't a single event, but a gradual accumulation of indignities. From the racial undertones in press coverage to the palace's reluctance to defend her, she felt like she was being isolated deliberately. And when she turned to the institution for help with her declining mental health, only to be told it would look bad, something inside her snapped. The monarchy had drawn a line, one that said, "Your survival is secondary to our survival." And that, she could not accept. This invisible line, the one that had slowly formed between Meghan and the monarchy, became painfully visible during her final royal appearances. When she and Harry returned to the UK in March 2020 for their last official engagements, The tension was visible in every frame. Meghan looked stunning in a bright green dress, standing beside Harry with poise and composure. But the smiles were strained, the warmth absent. William and Kate offered no real interaction. Charles avoided prolonged eye contact. The photographs, widely circulated, captured a farewell, not just from a family, but from an institution that had made up its mind. The public didn't know it at the time, but Meghan and Harry had already decided they wouldn't return to royal duties. The exit was imminent. And yet, even as they stepped back, the line remained. They were told they could no longer represent the Queen. They would lose their honorary military titles. Their patronages would be reassigned. They could keep their HRH titles, but not use them. The monarchy was severing them from its core, politely, but permanently. For Meghan, it was the final confirmation that she had never truly been accepted. And for the monarchy, it was a quiet victory. The removal of a disruptive element without overt confrontation. But the consequences of that divide have lingered ever since. Meghan has gone on to build a life of her own, launching podcasts, investing in business ventures, advocating for women's rights, and raising her children in California. She remains a public figure, one who continues to spark debate and stir headlines. But within the walls of the British monarchy, her name is rarely spoken. When it is, it's with guarded caution. And now, with King Charles's funeral plan excluding her from attendance, that invisible line has become official. A line drawn not just in perception, but in policy. To some, this exclusion feels cruel. To others, it feels justified. But what it undeniably reveals is the enduring chasm between Meghan Markle and the institution she once tried to join. A chasm too wide to bridge, too deep to ignore. And as the monarchy moves forward without her, the question remains. Was the system ever meant to welcome someone like Meghan? Or was it always destined to reject her, not for who she was, but for what she represented? That invisible line, drawn in silence, cemented in headlines, and finalized in funeral protocol, tells us everything we need to know.